I was folding Mason's school uniform when I heard the suitcase slam upstairs. At 67, I knew the sound of trouble and my instincts didn't lie. My son Mason's father was packing in a frenzy, throwing his life into a bag as if running from fire. I stood in the doorway watching the boy I once rocked to sleep now shoving shirts and lies into a suitcase. Business trip, he muttered. But Craig never went on business trips. He worked tech support at a shabby local office. My heart cracked as I realized this wasn't just a trip, this was goodbye. I begged him, pleaded with the man who had once kissed the frame of his wife's photo every night before bed. But Linda was gone, taken from us in childbirth, and Craig had been vanishing ever since. He told me Mason was better off with me, that I'd been the real parent all along. His words cut deeper than the sound of the door shutting behind him. And just like that, Mason and I were abandoned. My grandson didn't cry. He didn't chase his father down the walkway. He closed his algebra book with calm hands and looked at me. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'll handle this." He was 13 years old. How could a child handle something so devastating? But Mason wasn't like other children. That night, while I lay sleepless in bed, I heard the soft, steady tapping of his keyboard. I found him at his desk, surrounded by notebooks and glowing screens, eyes sharp with focus no child should carry. "Dad's been stealing from us," he said, showing me statements that made my stomach collapse. My life savings, $12 left. Mason's college fund gone. Craig had drained it all, funneled through accounts with the help of a woman named Vanessa, his girlfriend, his partner in crime. My son had not only abandoned us, he had robbed us blind. Worse, he had stolen our names, our identities, applying for loans that would leave us buried in debt we never touched. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to call the police. But Mason was calm, methodical. He had tracked every transfer, every email, every fake account. He had evidence. More than that, he had a plan. "They thought we were helpless," he said, "but they were sloppy. I've been watching them." His voice didn't tremble. Mine did. By the next morning, Mason had already sent fraud alerts, filed reports, even slipped Vanessa's employer evidence of her crimes. I stared at my grandson in awe and fear. While I mourned the betrayal, he had launched a counterattack. Vanessa was suspended. Craig's accounts froze. And Mason smiled, cold, certain, because he knew they would pay. But what chilled me most wasn't just what Craig had done to us. It was what Mason uncovered next, that my son had helped Vanessa scam elderly families, draining hundreds of thousands from people who trusted her with their life savings. My heart broke under the weight of shame. My own son had become a predator. And yet, in my kitchen, eating scrambled eggs before school, Mason calmly mapped out justice. Anonymous evidence packages, fraud reports, restitution. He wasn't just fighting for us, he was fighting for every family Craig and Vanessa had destroyed. I should have been the protector. I should have been the one shielding him. But it was my grandson, 13 years old, who carried the fire, who turned betrayal into justice. He was a child, but he was also our avenger. I woke the next morning to the smell of toast and the soft hum of Mason's printer. He was already awake, dressed, his school bag at his feet. On the table sat a stack of papers, organized, highlighted, annotated like a prosecutor's file. My grandson, 13 years old, had compiled a case thicker than anything the local sheriff's office could have pieced together. He showed me emails between my son and Vanessa, exchanges laced with greed and contempt. There were messages about the old lady's nest egg me, mocking my frugality, laughing at how easy it had been to drain my accounts. I read words my son had typed, mocking me, the mother who had raised him after his father walked out, the woman who had taken in his boy when he was too selfish to care for him. My hands shook so violently the coffee sloshed from my mug. Mason placed his small hand over mine. "Grandma," he said, steady as stone, "this isn't just about us anymore. Look." He opened another folder. Names, addresses, account numbers. People my son and Vanessa had scammed. A retired couple who lost their mortgage, a widower whose pension was stolen, a single mother who thought she was investing for her child's future. Each name was a wound, each story a fresh betrayal. Craig wasn't just a runaway son, he was a predator. I wanted to collapse into grief, to bury myself in the ache of it all. But Mason wouldn't allow it. "We can't just cry about it," he said. "We have to make sure they pay." That afternoon, while other boys his age were playing video games or worrying about homework, Mason was drafting reports to federal agencies. He was careful, meticulous. He knew which evidence to send, where, how to link transactions, how to expose Vanessa's employer to her crimes without compromising the investigation. It was terrifying and yet awe-inspiring to watch a child step into a role most adults would shy from. At night, when I thought he was asleep, I found him hunched over the glow of his laptop, tracing IP addresses, documenting trails of stolen money. His eyes were rimmed red, but they burned with something fierce resolve. I whispered that he was too young for this burden, that I should be the one fighting, but he shook his head. "They underestimated us, Grandma. That's their mistake, and I won't let them win." Days turned into weeks. Vanessa lost her job. Investigators began circling. Accounts froze. Phone calls came at odd hours. Craig frantic, begging me to believe him, to send money to protect Mason from the fallout. I hung up every time, my heart torn, my shame deep. This was my son, my blood. And yet the only family I truly had left was the boy sleeping in the next room, the boy carrying the weight his father had thrown away. Then came the night Mason looked at me with a spark I hadn't seen since Linda was alive. "It's working," he said. "They're cornered. But I want them to feel it, Grandma. I want them to know what it's like to lose everything they thought they controlled." His words scared me. Revenge is a heavy fire, and I worried it might burn him. But maybe I thought this was more than revenge. This was justice. Still, I couldn't shake the guilt. My son had become a thief, a liar, a man willing to sacrifice his own mother and child for greed. And it was Mason, 13 years old, who was saving us while I sat in the shadows of regret, wondering where I had gone wrong. The house was quiet, but Mason's room pulsed with the low glow of his computer. I stood in the doorway, watching his fingers race across the keyboard, his face lit up in that ghostly blue. He didn't look like a child anymore. He looked like a soldier in a war no one else could see. "Grandma," he said without turning, "they're panicking. Dad and Vanessa are trying to move money fast, but the accounts are freezing one by one." His voice was flat, controlled. Not triumphant, just steady, like he had prepared himself for this moment all along. He showed me messages he'd intercepted, arguments between Craig and Vanessa. My son blamed her for being sloppy. She blamed him for being greedy. I read the words with a pit in my stomach, seeing my child reduced to this clawing and cursing, willing to destroy anyone, even his own family, just to save himself. Then Mason clicked another window, and my breath caught. There was an old photo, me and baby Craig, my smile wide, his chubby arms around my neck. Beside it, Mason had placed screenshots of Craig's bank transfers, the evidence of betrayal. It was like two different men lived in the same body, the son I had raised and the criminal he had become. "Why are you keeping that photo there?" I whispered. Mason looked at me, his young eyes older than they should ever be. "So I remember what we're fighting for. Not just revenge, Grandma, but to protect what's left of him too. If we stop them, maybe Dad won't drag anyone else down." The words hit me hard. My grandson was protecting strangers, protecting even the man who had betrayed him. Meanwhile, all I felt was anger. Anger at Craig for stealing, for leaving, for tearing holes in our lives that could never fully mend. A week later, the call came. Authorities had followed the trail Mason laid out. Vanessa was arrested, first pulled from her office in handcuffs. Her face splashed across local news. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman my son had chosen over us. She looked small, frightened, ordinary. And my son, he vanished, running again, like he had always run. But not far. Mason had anticipated it. He had given investigators the path Craig would take, the accounts he'd try to access, even the motel chain he favored when he was hiding. 2 days later, they caught him. My son, my little boy, now a grown man in cuffs, was led away under flashing lights. Reporters shouted questions, neighbors gawked. I couldn't bring myself to watch the footage. Mason did, though. His jaw tightened, but he didn't smile. When he turned to me, his voice was quiet. "It's over, Grandma. We're safe now." Safe. The word should have brought me comfort. Instead, it hollowed me. Because though Mason had stopped the bleeding, the wound remained. My son was gone not just in body but in spirit. The man I had loved raised, prayed for he no longer existed. What was left was a stranger who wore his face. That night, as Mason finally slept his computer dark for the first time in weeks, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the balance sheet he'd printed. Accounts restored. Debts cleared. Our savings slowly trickling back from restitution funds. On paper, we were recovering, but no numbers could measure what we had lost. I thought of Linda, the daughter-in-law. I never got to know the woman who died bringing Mason into this world. Would she have been proud of the boy she left behind? Would she forgive me for failing to keep her husband, the father of her child, on the right path? The guilt pressed down like a weight. But when Mason stirred in the next room mumbling in his sleep, I reminded myself I still had him. He was my reason to keep going, my second chance at love and family. He had carried me through betrayal I thought would destroy me. Maybe now I had to learn how to carry him through the scars it left on both of us. Mason slept late the next morning, the first real rest he'd had in weeks. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, the way his face softened back into that of a boy, not the hardened fighter I had seen at his desk. I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. But storms leave wreckage, and ours was scattered everywhere. The news spread fast. Neighbors whispered. Parents at Mason's school pulled their children a little closer as if betrayal could be contagious. Teachers stopped me in the parking lot, their voices lowered but their questions sharp. "Is it true your son was part of that scam?" I nodded, carrying shame like a second skin. But Mason didn't flinch. He walked into class with his head held high, and when kids teased him about his father being a thief, he simply said, "I'm not my dad. Remember that." And somehow they did. It was the adults who struggled more, the ones who couldn't separate blood from choice. At home, I tried to stitch normalcy back together. I cooked his favorite meals, played old records, told him stories about his mother Linda. He listened quietly, his eyes always lingering on the empty space where his father should have been. I wondered if he hated Craig, or if somewhere inside he still loved him. Mason didn't say. He just carried it in silence, the way children often do. Weeks turned into months. Vanessa went to trial first. Her smirk gone, her arrogance stripped. She pled guilty, and the judge's gavel came down hard. Craig followed, and when I sat in the courtroom, I barely recognized him. His hair unkempt, his eyes hollow, his suit wrinkled. He glanced at me once, just once, and I couldn't read what was in his eyes. Shame, anger, or nothing at all. He never looked at Mason. The sentence was heavy. Fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. He would be gone for years. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was mourning. Not for the man in chains, but for the boy he used to be. The boy who once drew crayon pictures for me on Mother's Day. The boy I sang to sleep when thunder rattled the windows. That boy was gone forever. After the trial, Mason slipped his hand into mine. His grip was firm, grounding. "It's over, Grandma," he said. But his eyes told me he knew better. It was never really over. Scars don't vanish, they just stop bleeding. One evening, months later, I walked past Mason's room and saw him staring at that same photo, the one of me and baby Craig. He didn't notice me, and I didn't interrupt. I just listened as he whispered to himself, "I'll never be like you, Dad. Never." My heart ached with both pride and sorrow. Pride that he was strong enough to break the cycle. Sorrow that a child had to make such a vow at 13. Life moved forward, slowly, painfully, but forward. Restitution funds trickled in, not enough to replace all that was stolen, but enough to remind us that justice had teeth. Mason returned to his studies, still brilliant, still burning with that quiet fire. I tried to give him as much of a childhood as I could salvage, even if it was stitched together with the remnants of betrayal. Sometimes late at night, I would wonder what people thought when they looked at me. Did they see the mother of a criminal or the grandmother of a hero? Maybe both. Maybe that was my truth, to carry shame and pride, grief and gratitude all tangled together. And maybe that was Mason's truth too, that even when blood betrays you, love can save you. He was proof of it. Seasons changed, and with them the sharpness of the wound dulled, though it never fully disappeared. Craig sat behind bars, and I visited only once. The man across the glass was a shadow of the boy I had raised. His eyes darted restless, his hands trembling as he picked at the seams of his prison clothes. He spoke of second chances, of appeals, of Vanessa being the one who dragged him into it all. But when he called me mom the way he used to as a child, my heart cracked all over again. I wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the hope that some piece of my son still lived beneath the wreckage. But when I thought of Mason, of the 13-year-old who had carried us both, I knew I couldn't risk giving Craig another chance to hurt us. I walked out before the visit ended. I never went back. Mason never asked to see his father. He poured himself into his studies instead, into coding, into late-night projects that made my living room glow with the soft hum of screens. Sometimes I'd find him sketching ideas for programs to protect seniors from online scams, his pencil scratching across paper with furious determination. "No one should go through what we did," he said once. His voice was quiet but unshakable. That was Mason turning pain into purpose. I often wondered what kind of man he would become. Would this betrayal harden him, or would it make him wiser, kinder, more vigilant? All I knew was that he carried scars that weren't his to bear, and yet he bore them with a strength that humbled me. My grandson had not just survived his father's betrayal, he had risen above it for both of us. One evening, while I was washing dishes, Mason came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "We're okay now, Grandma," he whispered. For the first time in a long while, I believed it. We had lost so much money, trust, family, but we still had each other. And sometimes that's enough. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know the wound never fully heals. But it doesn't have to define you. Betrayal can be a weight, or it can be a fire. For Mason and me, it became the fire that forged us stronger. My son may have broken me, but my grandson reminded me that love, loyalty, and resilience can rebuild even the most shattered life. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? Leave me a comment below so we can talk about it.